Hello, everybody. This is Jasmin Singer. I am the executive director and co-founder of Our Hen House, which you can find at ourhenhouse.org. And I am also the author of the memoir Always Too Much and Never Enough, which was published in February 2016 through Penguin Random House's Berkeley. And it's my story. It's my roundabout journey to seeking personal authenticity by way of animal rights and veganism and a whole lot more. I have been a fan of Tom and Nancy Regan for a long time, and the Culture and Animals Foundation has been a great cheerleader and supporter to so many aspects of the animal rights movement, and I'm lucky enough and excited to tell you that they've also been a supporter of Our Hen House for years, since well before people had any idea what Our Hen House was. And one thing that particularly resonates with me and makes me absolutely love the Culture and Animals Foundation is Tom and Nancy's dedication to supporting the arts and to understanding and respecting all of the various ways that the arts can change the world for animals. My partner Mariann Sullivan and I started Our Hen House in January of 2010 because we were excited about getting people emboldened in their own lives to change the world for animals from a variety of perspectives. We don't think that there is one right way to do so. And Mariann has a background in law, and specifically in animal law, which is why she hosts Our Hen House's Animal Law podcast. And I have a background in the arts, specifically in theater, but of course, more recently in writing. And so Mariann's background and excitement about the law as a way to change the world for animals, combined with my own in the arts as a way to change the world for animals, was the foundation in a lot of ways for Our Hen House. And we have grown from that and expanded. But if you look closely, and actually not even that closely, if you just glance at Our Hen House, you'll see that the arts plays a huge role in what we do. We often have artists on the Our Hen House Weekly podcast. We've had so many different artists. We've had musicians, we've had painters, we've had photographers, we've had filmmakers, we've had writers, we've had poets. We've had people who are interested in found art as a way to change the world for animals. We've had people who are interested in creating flash mobs, which to me is a form of art as a way to change the world for animals. And that is something that Tom and Nancy and the Culture and Animals Foundation has been very excited about as well. And I loved when we interviewed Tom a few years back to talk about the root of his work with the Culture and Animals Foundation and how it all started really with a play. And that excited me so much. You know, you don't necessarily think of Tom Regan and think, oh, a play and the arts. You think philosophy and like this amazing thinker. But I get so jazzed when I learn about people who are just brilliant thought leaders like Tom, and then I learn that they love a good play that is pushing the envelope in terms of changing the world for animals. And that's what they're doing over at Culture and Animals Foundation. And I have been so grateful for so long to have the continued support of this foundation. I have been honored. I think Culture and Animals Foundation is one of the very first grants we have received. And every time I communicate with Nancy, I just get the warmest, most supportive, validating correspondences, and I am a huge fan. And I'm sure if you're listening to this, you are too, but after you hear this interview that we did with Tom Regan, you're going to be even more of a fan because this is exciting, and this is one of my very favorite interviews. We're now in our 7th year, and this is going to move you. I'm sure of it. So thank you. And if you're interested in Our Hen House, like the Culture and Animals Foundation is, visit us over at ourhenhouse.org. But for now, enjoy this blast from the past, this fantastic interview with the incomparable Tom Regan. How about Tom Regan?
I can't believe we've got Tom Regan.
I can't either. It's kind of one of those things. It's sort of like the Dr. Oz show. Tom Regan is on our podcast, and I am so delighted that he has agreed to join us today. And he, of course, has really shaped the thinking in many, many ways of the animal rights movement early on, and he continues to be very involved. And I think he's got such incredible insight. I'm excited to share it with you. So let's talk to Tom Regan. Tom Regan is Emeritus Professor of Philosophy at North Carolina State University, where he spent over 3 decades on the faculty, during which time he published numerous papers and over 30 books. Upon his retirement, the NCSU Library established the Tom Regan Animal Rights Archive. Tom's The Case for Animal Rights, published in 1983, was immediately recognized as a modern classic. Other books that he published exploring the topic of animal rights are All That Dwell Therein, Essays on Animal Rights, Environmental Ethics, Animal Sacrifices, Religious Perspectives on the Use of Animals in Science, The Struggle for Animal Rights, The Three Generation, Reflections on the Coming Revolution, Defending Animal Rights, The Animal Rights and Other Nations, Animals in Modern Literature, written with Andrew Lindsay. Tom has been described as the philosophical leader of the animal rights movement by the editors of Utne Reader, who recognized him as one of 50 visionaries who are changing the world. He has also received awards for his work on 2 films, We Are Noah and Voices I Have Heard. Along with his partner Nancy, he co-founded the Culture and Animals Foundation, which you can find at cultureandanimals.org. Welcome to our hen house, Tom Regan.
Thank you for having me.
We're so excited to have you. This is a very big deal for us to have you. We're just longtime followers and fans of your work.
Oh, yeah. Work is absolutely seminal. We're so excited to have you on. And before we get into the nitty-gritty, can you just tell us how you got started? Because you were kind of there before almost anybody. How did you get started in your interest in animals and with what happens to them?
Proximate cause was my wife Nancy and I were involved in the anti-war movement during the Vietnam period. And I wanted to make a philosophical contribution to the anti-war movement. And naturally, I turned to read Gandhi, Mahatma Gandhi. Mm-hmm. And I still remember the day that I took down a book from the stacks in the NC State Library. And it was by Gandhi, and it was titled "My Experiments with Truth." And when we read Gandhi, what we were impressed by was that he did not think that violence stopped at the boundaries of our species. In other words, we were trying to end the war, but there was another undeclared war going on, being conducted against other animals. And he wanted to have no part of that either. So he was the one who taught us that the fork is a weapon of violence, or can be a weapon of violence. And because of our commitment to nonviolent life, we gave up eating meat. We spent several years as lacto-ovo vegetarians, but eventually, 20 years ago or so, we evolved into vegans.
Well, that is just great. I love that you came to this from the anti-war movement. When did you write The Case for Animal Rights? And for our listeners who might not be familiar, who've just sort of joined the animal rights movement, can you tell us what its basic thesis is?
Sure. Actually, the first piece that I wrote on ethics in animals was the moral basis of vegetarianism, which was published in 1975. And that was so far as I know, the first peer-reviewed philosophy journal. It was a Canadian Journal of Philosophy. It was the first piece on vegetarianism that was published by a peer-reviewed professional journal. Then I started writing other chapters and other papers and the like, and I was fortunate in 1982 to receive a grant from the National Humanities Foundation And that gave me the time to work on the case for animal rights, which was published in 1983. Species, I guess you would call them, are that first other animals are complicated psychological beings. They have beliefs and desires, memories, expectations. They can act intentionally. Not all animals, not paramecia and amoeba, for example, but certainly the animals that we turn into food and turn into competitors and turn into tools and turn into clothes, all those animals certainly qualify as being what I call subjects of a life. I mean, they're not something, they're someone. They have a life of their own that's of importance to them, and what happens to them matters to them because it makes a difference to the quality and duration of their life. So in these respects, they are fundamentally like you and I. They are fundamentally on all fours, so to speak, with us when it comes to being the subject of a life. And the only adequate response then to recognizing our equality with them is to stop war we're waging as a species against them. That means a total abolition when it comes to turning animals into food and into clothes and into competitors and into tools and etc. The total end to their exploitation. That's the only adequate response.
You came to these theories before anybody else did, and yet you still hear some of these same arguments.
And one of the things you often hear from meat eaters, and we just read it in the New York Times this morning, is that it's impossibly difficult for an Alaskan Inuit near Barrow Point or nomads living in arid climates to be vegan. What do you make of these kinds of arguments?
Well, I think it shows a kind of bad faith. The person who's saying that probably, I'm assuming, lives in some urban or suburban place in the United States, and what is necessary for survival if you're an Inuit is not necessary for survival if you live in New York City,
right?
For example. So I think it's just a case of bad faith. The differences are enormous between what happens if very cold climates, for example, amongst the Inuit, that doesn't transfer to what happens in what's possible for people living in Brooklyn.
Yeah, speaking of bad faith, I think the person who was saying that was a representative of the pork industry, so it's possible there was just a little bit of bad faith involved. So how do you deal with weighing competing interests when they conflict between, legitimate competing interests when they occur between humans and animals? Say rats in your house or something like that. How do you weigh those problems?
I think that it's an important point. That is to say that we won't be satisfied with anything less than total abolition of animal exploitation. That's basically, to me, that's a way of thinking about the industrial exploitation of non-human animals. We will not be satisfied with anything less than that total abolition of those industries. Aside from, in addition to what happens in terms of industrial exploitation of animals, you can have conflicts that arise between human interests and non-human animal interests, just as you can have conflicts that arise between one human being and another human being. Mm-hmm. So I don't think there's a magic formula for that, about how to adjudicate this clash of interests, this clash of rights. I don't think that takes anything away from the overarching aim of the animal rights movement, and that is abolitionist in its aspirations.
Do you find that issues regarding animals receive more attention with students studying philosophy than they have in previous years?
Oh, yeah, sure. I think that, there's been more written in philosophy about animals in the last 30 years than there was written in the previous 3,000 years. So there's been just a groundswell of philosophical interest in the issues. Not saying that everybody agrees that animals have rights. Peter Singer doesn't think that animals have rights, for example. But nonetheless, I mean, if you're going to dip into the currents of current discussion, you're going to have to consider whether animals have rights or not.
So aside from changes in the academy, how have things changed in the world since you first became involved in thinking about animals seriously?
Well, I just read something a few days ago that basically testifies to the fact that there's been an enormous increase in per capita consumption of meat, and just an enormous increase in that, including, but not restricted to, just the United States. So in 1975, when I wrote The Moral Basis of Vegetarianism, there were 6 billion animals being slaughtered in America. Now that's over 10 billion animals slaughtered in America. And worldwide, not counting marine life, there are more than 50 billion animals that are being slaughtered. So in some ways, the world is a much worse place.
Yeah.
That doesn't detract from the activism that people have been waging over the last 30 or so years. Mm-hmm. It's just a realistic reality check for us. I mean, yes, we can eat at Candle Cafe and Blossoms, I think it is, isn't it? Yeah. But and where 30 years ago we couldn't find decent vegan food, and even in New York. As I say, as a reality check, we have to keep mindful of the power of this industrial exploitation of non-humans and the great war that's being waged against them. I want to say a little bit about the war analogy because that's what I've been thinking about lately. See, in wars, weapons are used to injure and kill and imprison the enemy. But if you stop and think about what's being done to other animals, that's what we do. We use weapons. We call them tools, but they're really weapons to take their life, to injure them, and to imprison them. And what we might say, well, I'm not doing that. I get up in the morning and I go through my day and I don't do that, so I'm absolved of any guilt. But in wartime, there are what's called mercenaries. These are people who are hired to wage the war. In the American Civil War, American Revolutionary War, for example, England hired Hessians to wage the war on behalf of the English. That's what a pig farmer is. That's what a vivisector is. That's what someone who trains elephants or lions in circuses. That's what they are. They're mercenaries. They are paid to wage the war on our behalf. Although our hands are not clean, even though we're not actively engaged in a war, but we pay other people to wage the war for us.
I love that analogy. I think that's a very powerful way of looking at it because it's so easy to think that the people who are doing it are the ones to blame, when it's the people who are paying it who are the real perpetrators of this violence, and dissociate themselves from it, which is...
If you think about the war analogy, you think about the other analogies that we've been using, the slavery analogy and the Holocaust analogy. But if you think about the Holocaust, the purpose of the Holocaust was to eradicate certain classes of people from the face of the earth. That's not what happens in animal agriculture. I mean, when it comes to the industries that are part of the agricultural war being waged against animals, they want to increase the number of animals. that they imprison and injure and kill. You don't want to eradicate populations of food animals, as they're called. And if we think about the slavery analogy, again, it wasn't that when people who owned slaves wanted to kill them all. I mean, it was normally in the interest of the slave owners to have their slaves, more slaves rather than fewer slaves. So I don't think that either the Holocaust analogy or the slavery analogy quite picks up on, as well as the war analogy does, on what's being done to animals.
Yeah. I think that, I don't know whether this will resonate with you, but as you were talking about it, I thought of the annual pardon of the turkeys. And I think that resonates with the war analogy as well, as if we have waged war against these animals, and these too we will let off the hook. But it really is that we're against them in some way, that they are opposing us, and therefore we can pardon them for some sin they have done.
Yeah, pardon. I agree. It's another aspect of the war analogy, I think. Yeah.
And Tom, you were talking about how things have changed since the 70s, and it's kind of amazing to actually hear the numbers of how many more land animals are slaughtered. All animals are slaughtered. I was born in the late 70s, and to hear that this has happened in, my lifetime, it's really sad, and it puts things in perspective. So pardon the simplistic question here, but do you have any hope?
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm an Irishman. Of course, I have hope. It's in my blood. But one has to be hopeful. Last thing other animals need is another reason for people to exploit them. And if we leave the movement, and many people do, there's like a revolving door of people coming in and people going out of the movement. But we cannot leave the movement because the animals depend on us. But hope they have is our work, is our calling, is our mission. It's our reason for being in the world. I mean, that's what I think every day of my life. I think I have a reason for being in this world, and it's to make things better. And I'm hopeful. Of course, I have to be, or else I wouldn't be here. I would be out golfing or something.
Yeah, I never actually understood the lore of golf, but I guess that's for another interview. What is the role of the arts, as you see it, in creating the kind of change that needs to happen if people are going to start attending to the animal issue in a serious way? How does the arts come into play there?
Now, there are many doors through which one passes, or which one can pass, to become part of the movement, to become active in the movement. Sure, I mean, I'm a long-time believer in the power of rational argument. That's what I've tried to do over the last 30 or so years. But people respond differently to different things, and theater and painting and dance and music and poetry, all those are doors through which people can enter the movement. So I'm all in favor of multiplying the opportunities for people to recognize their commonality with our brothers and sisters in fur and feather and fin. And so the arts have a decidedly positive role to play.
Yeah, I think you're so right, and I'm so grateful to the Culture and Animals Foundation for supporting the arts, and I think that we're only just beginning to see how much change can come from that. The other project that you're involved in that I wanted to ask you about was the Tom Regan Animal Rights Collection at North Carolina State, where, of course, you've taught for many years. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, when I was retiring in 2000, I was approached by the librarians and asked whether I would consider donating my papers to to the NC State Library, and I was greatly honored and surprised, obviously, because this is a big agricultural school. We have a vet school here. It was very courageous of the library to make the offer. And it's odd because I've never been a person to squirrel things away. You know, I've never been compulsive about saving stuff and saving stuff and saving stuff. And so I didn't know how much stuff I had. I mean, it was up in the attic. And we always said that's the kids' problem when they'll have to figure out what to do with what's up there. So it ended up that there was quite a lot in the attic, even though I hadn't willfully been squirreling it away. So in addition to my papers, which served as the nucleus of the collection, there are many, many other works that have been added to the collection since its beginnings. And hopefully, I'm hopeful that they will continue to be added. Today, the collection at North Carolina State University is the preeminent animal rights, animal welfare collection in the world.
Wow.
And we are thoroughly committed to improving that.
So great. It sounds like such an amazing collection, such a great reason to look through the attic. So just last question, Tom. A lot of our listeners have only recently started to think about the role that animals play and how we should relate to these animals. And a lot of our listeners, they want to do their best to change the world, to make it a better place for all of us. What advice would you have to people who are just starting this journey and they want to do all they can to change the world for animals?
Well, the most important thing, I think, for new activists is not to be impatient with people who don't get it. When I meet people like that who don't quite get it, I remember that was me. It's like looking in a mirror to me, because I used to be that person. I mean, my goodness, when I was going to college, I worked as a butcher. I was... animals back then might as well have been pieces of wood. As they said, their cold flesh gave way to my cruel will. They were some things, not somebody's. Mm-hmm. That's the way I conceived of them. So when I see somebody who's stuck there, as I say, it's like looking in a mirror. Mm-hmm. And the last thing an activist wants to do is to provide other people with another reason not to care about animals. And we do provide that person with another reason if we're rude, or if we're confrontational, if we're impatient, if we're holier than thou. You know, all that is a turnoff. I mean, we're just given a blank check to that person to not care about animals. And we haven't done it willfully, we haven't done it intentionally, but we have done it. Mm-hmm. So the most important thing to a new activist is for them not to provide another reason for people who don't get it.
That is so
to continue
true.
Not to get it.
Yeah, absolutely. It's so important to remember that. And it's good to just remind ourselves of that from time to time. And this has really been eye-opening for me. So thank you. I'm sure our listeners agree. We so appreciate your sharing your extremely wise words with us. And talking to you has been a great honor and privilege. So thank you for joining us. And thank you for everything you've done to truly, truly change the world.
Nancy and I send our thanks to you as well.
That was the one and only Tom Regan.